Just a few disclaimers before we start. I work for a very large analyst company beginning with the letter G. However, this presentation does not represent those of my employer. All opinions contained are my own. So please don't blame my analyst company for any of the comments that are within this session. So what's my background and evidence for some of the claims and aspects I'm going to be talking about today? I've been working as an industry analyst for the last 7 years, and I was crunching the numbers. It means I've spoken to around 4,000 enterprise architects, IT leaders, CIOs, and vendors from multiple sized organizations, from startups to the largest industry vendors. Very large number of disparate types of end users, ranging from government, all types of business, etc. Whilst I'm not allowed to share sort of like really hard data from my employers, it's nonetheless many of these opinions have been discussed with my colleagues and represent a general industry opinion, although not necessarily exactly what you will see published. Most of my coverage is not on the decisioning space. I cover application platforms, as Jacob said, but I do help out with topics covering decisioning. Given my background, there are plenty of interesting questions coming along. And of course, decisioning is part and parcel of every type of application as well. I also support some of the business process discussions, and I've also got a history, as Jacob said, of working in rules technology as well for a large number of years. So I have a few qualifications anyway to be able to justify my existence and presence here and your time, for which I'm grateful. Thank you very much. So just starting off with some key observations. The relationship between data, business process, and business decisions is something that remains a universal truth for a lot of IT systems. Whether you're talking about major software as a service vendors like doing things like CRM or IT service management, they're all collecting information. They're involving some sort of workflow regarding that information, regarding some business process, and they're either supporting or assisting with some decision at the end of that. However, it's true to point out that most of IT's attention is in that order as well. So we see a lot of focus on data storage, for example, systems of records. That remains a key area of work for IT organizations. Process, moderately so, but we see a lot of that embedded in things like software as a service and being developed by the business. And decision is still very much the sort of poor relation to the data and process side, but is becoming more prevalent probably due to the effects and interest in and hype around AI machine learning and how that benefits organizations, because of course AI/ML traditionally affects and allows you to improve your decision making. So that's having a good positive effect on the role of decision in IT leaders' minds. Another aspect is that declarative development is not so popular amongst professional developers. I'm not sure whether this is really a downturn trend or simply something that it's had less occasion to be talked about. But most of the conversations I have with my tech professional colleagues are really around improving professional coders and doing their own job, which of course in terms of decisioning is really just custom code development. So that's a large focus on things like API management, DevOps, CI/CD, all the tools of the modern service development organization. And of course that's having a positive effect along with methodologies like Agile, but nonetheless doesn't displace, if you like, the need for accurate decision technology usage. Another observation is that asset management and reuse is more of a big concern to business rather than to IT. And when I talk about asset management here, I'm talking about things like business process management, decision management. So the understanding of use of the artifacts built up to build and model the decisions and the processes in organizations is very much something that's of interest for efficiency reasons for business, but not so much for IT. In fact, it's probably true to say that a lot of IT folks have had have bad opinions and have bad experiences using, especially business process technologies from certain vendors due to them being oversold at a particular price for extremely complex use cases and failing to deliver. And you only need, one of those in a CIO's sort of lifetime to really spoil the party for all other use cases. And then finally, IT is becoming, universal within organizations. Everybody has access to a computer, smartphone, apps, applications, and dedicated IT is becoming relatively less relevant because IT is becoming embedded as part of the business operations. And I'll come back to that when we talk about things like business technologists and citizen developers. So anyway, this is my starter for four, and then looking at the key trends which I want to talk about today: developer democratization, rising abstraction levels, and automation. So developer democratization, is this citizen developer aspect, and we often see sort of things like business technologists, citizen developers, etc., as terms in when we're talking to clients as analysts. And we did a survey recently and found that over 40% of the staff in an organization class themselves as business technologists, and that's been validated in a few other surveys. It's just a surprisingly large number, and you might scratch your head and think, well, why is that the case, and what are these business technologists doing? And they're effectively doing IT, but just not reporting to an IT organization, and typically are part-time. They're part of another business unit. And they're doing things like integrations using tools like Zapier, Workato, and Trader.io, and tools like that. They may be doing automations, so scripting effectively. They may be doing more complex analytics. It's relatively common for students today to learn languages like R and Python. And of course, they will be building up, technology skills as they do so in college. And when they get into the workplace, they're expecting to do, some of that themselves quite often. I recall a situation when I spoke to an end user who had, during the lockdown period for COVID-19, had furloughed some of their production staff and their blue-collar workers, and had accidentally found that they had actually furloughed some of their citizen developers, and their business leaders were hopping mad because they had they had lost some of their Power Apps developers. So developer democratization is something that's definitely going on right now. And if 40% of an organization are doing technology work, then obviously they require tooling, and they're going to be doing things up to and including decision automation. So what's happening elsewhere? Well, the IT staff are of course focusing on things like systems of records and infrastructure and operations and security, and they tend to have control over the sort of like the core data assets of organizations. But the business technologists are looking at things like the business efficiency, more tactical applications, and they're sort of increasingly independent from traditional IT. And our general sort of like guidance is, of course, that you don't want shadow IT to be developed by these citizen developers, etc. You need to have a connection with your full-time professional IT teams. The next one is rising abstraction level, and this is, of course, is to either help with developer democratization, but it's also helping professional IT as tools introduce things like more model-driven, low-code support, more abstraction of the infrastructure aspects through cloud, automation of the software development lifecycle, built-in test equipment, and things like that. And so, the more you're abstracting up for, generic use cases, the fewer the specialist use cases there are, and the more likely it is that business developers can, deliver on applications for and automations for an organization. And those automation needs, of course, are also evolving. We see a lot of automation taking place in organizations. In fact, at Gartner, we have a term called hyperautomation, which describes the methodology around using these. And that ranges from, standard data collection, document and content management, up to and including now AI being applied to intelligent document processing, which has reached quite impressive levels of performance for those still dealing with non-digital forms. And then we see process and task mining and a continual interest in business process automation and associated interest in task automation, robotic process automation, which of course is mostly a type of integration for some users, and as well as sort of virtual employees for others. And then, of course, you get into this large area of interest on AI/ML, which, as I said earlier, is driving a lot of interest in decisions. But there's a lot of application development as well, which is also embedding process, embedding analytics, embedding integrations, and starting to embed automated decisioning as well. And of course, a lot of these are bought off the shelf as software as a service services. And there is certainly a trend towards buy over build. In fact, the common refrain I hear is, we reuse. If we can't reuse something, we buy it. If we can't buy it, then we reluctantly build it. But organizations, recognize that there is a cost to doing application development, and so, and as well as scarce skills for doing conventional application development, conventional coding, etc. So that's something which automation teams are increasingly business-led, and of course, many of these technologies are well established, like business process automation, and we are seeing some flip over into decision automation as well. So those are sort of like the three key trends. And what do we actually see in organizations as a result of these trends? So robotic process automation, quite often our discussions with these, and RPA is a very hot topic right now. So we see a lot of RPA usage in organizations. And these task automation, solving things like swivel chair integration problems, we often find that actually the problem they're trying to solve is slightly wider than simply the collection of data on the desktop. It's actually involves a workflow and handing data off for review, and basically a business process problem. And so there's this natural evolution from RPA teams to consider business process automation. The interesting thing, there's a parallel, if you like, with the business process teams who eventually realize that actually what they're doing is solving decision automation. And it's a historical sort of like fact, really, that we see a lot of people coding their decisions in BPMN, not through any particular perverse reason to do that, simply because they don't, they aren't aware that they're building a decision automation at the start, and or they're not familiar with standards like DMN or decision modeling in general. But that's quite common as well. There is associated with the things like process and decision automation, a set of associated skill sets. So learning around how to use BPMN and DMN really give business analyst skills which equate to what we would call process engineering and decision engineering. And they're often as important as core software engineering, but we don't see that recognized in most IT organizations. There's still a sort of like a disdain for these sort of like higher level notations and for declarative way of doing things, and the desire to have the minute level control via code. And that's really, associated with this concern around lock-in as well. So organizations concerned that they would be locked into the skills of a process engineer or decision engineer, even using standards. And of course, that's a little bit of a fallacy because of the first of all, higher level abstractions are extremely popular. You just have to look at Salesforce as a great example of a vendor that has a particular abstraction of how to do customer relationship management. And associated with their CRM tooling, they have a set of platform tools which, by some estimations, are now the most successful platform vendor. So, a software as a service vendor is actually getting more revenues for its platforms than all the other vendors like AWS and Microsoft, etc., which is quite an incredible sort of thing, really. And because Salesforce is mostly dealing with low-code tools, and that's despite some organizations' concerns around lock-in. So there are concerns, but as I said, it's a bit of a fallacy. And even if you're a coder building Java EE applications, for example, you're invariably going to end up with some aspects of lock-in to your particular application server of choice. So there is concern. Some of it is valid, but nonetheless, it's somewhat outdated. There is increasing business frustration with the delivery speed of IT, and that's a frustration because core IT is expensive. I've got a development team building applications, custom applications. Then I've always got these new silver bullets to consider. I've got to make sure that they are fully trained up with the latest development techniques and technologies, the latest frameworks. And of course, if I am employing, coding, rocket scientists effectively, then I have to pay a lot for them. I mean, I think the Netflix salary range for their developers goes up to something like 800K per year. That's a lot of money. So high cost and slow delivery is extremely frustrating for businesses. But it's not really too surprising when you consider that at the same time, IT is having to deliver systems that perform at scale. They have to be cloud native, operate in the cloud, often possibly even multi-cloud. They have to deliver capabilities through an API. They maybe have to include monetization. There's all sorts of extra things beyond simply delivering a service that IT has to get involved with. So invariably, this is still driving, more and more interest in low code and abstracted mechanisms to deliver on IT. So at the same time, we're seeing this shift from IT-focused vendors to business solution vendors. So vendors like Microsoft, ServiceNow, Salesforce fall into this category, but there are many other software as a service and solution delivery vendors I speak to who have their own platform and who are finding that their platform is solving business problems for their customers as a sort of like almost an adjunct to their core business. And we're seeing revenues, what organizations are budgeting for and paying for, switching to the business units as they purchase more and more of these software as a service solutions and internal development tools. At the same time, we also see, there's still a little bit of a challenge when we look at the decisioning space, where organizations, architects, enterprise architects are still wondering what do they actually need. They understand they want some flexibility in terms of their business logic, but they're still discussing things like business rule engines and things like that, which are somewhat old hat in terms of technology, versus understanding, for example, your decisions and decision management. So there's still a lot of a lack of understanding, I think, with end user organizations around the state of the art on the decision technology side. So what's next for decisioning? So there's one view which says, well, I've got decisioning, which sits beyond processes and sits beyond data. What are the things that we should be expecting to come along? And one aspect from the data side is probably getting decisions more in the face of the data scientists, so that they can contribute more to the decision delivery process beyond simply a component in a DMN model. So that's basically an extension to the idea that decisions are becoming more important because of the rise of analytics. It's really not the case. The decisions have always been important. It's just that analytics is a very interesting area to improve decisions, is adding a focus to them. At the same time, we still see, these process and decision models working together, using these different standards, and embedding, business rule decisions within, for example, process diagrams. All this is fine, but there's probably some requirement to improve the visibility, if you like, of the decision components within process diagrams. We certainly see a lot of business process automation vendors supporting decisions and things like decision tables, if not full DMN. So there is certainly opportunity for them to do more here. And we certainly see some vendors, especially on the standard side, supporting full BPMN, DMN, and even in some cases CMMN, and enabling process and decision engineers to build out their applications and process and decision services separately. But probably from where I sit, there needs to be some more guidance for people building processes to understand when they're actually should be building decisions. There's also this business versus IT perspective. First of all, understanding that decision engineering, should be viewed as a discipline, and it should be, prevalent in organizations who are automating or supporting decisions through IT. This is possibly something for the academic community to drill down on as well. It's something which, if I am able to deliver better, faster decisions to IT teams using tools like decision model management, decision modeling, and DMN, then that should be verifiable, and it should be well understood by IT teams and software architects. They should understand when to bring in the decision engineering team, and what are the implications for their architecture. The other side, on the business side, we need to see more tools to enable the business technologists to provide a better citizen developer experience, if you like, for creating decisions. And I have seen some tools which are starting to do this, and I was very interested to hear. So there are some large parts of, for example, the federal government who have used citizen developer decision tools to what they consider to be great effect. And of course, this isn't an isolated island that still needs to potentially be automated in a large scale automation mechanism. But for just like RPA has been a huge success for individual task automation on integration, I think we need something equivalent for everyday decision automation. And it's interesting to see that some of the RPA vendors are starting to supply this simplified decisioning capabilities as part of their tool sets. The next one is vendor ecosystem. So there's two aspects to vendor ecosystem to consider. First of all, there is, vendors who have very large ecosystems for whom there's a natural demand, if you like, for more improved IT capabilities, like decisioning capabilities. So that's the vendors like, for example, Microsoft and Salesforce, etc., where they do support decisioning natively, but specialist decision services, either by industry or by technology type, are probably going to be quite interesting. With Salesforce in particular, as they are the biggest vendor now for platforms, they also have, as part of their success, they've built out an app exchange, a delivery mechanism to deliver complementary services to their customers, and they of course have a huge customer base, and that's the sort of ecosystem which I'm talking about here. But there's also the ecosystem aspect of delivering support, if you like, for users of decisions, people who need decisions. And this ties in a little bit maybe with the citizen developer experience. What are the decision templates and what are the pre-built decisions that I might want to invoke as a pre-built service or as a template which I can modify to meet my own requirements. And that's again, possibly something which is more of considered historically as an education issue, but it's something which we've seen especially important in other areas of application platforms. And we're seeing the same sort of like questions come up in the business process space, and some of the vendors there are doing a very good job in supporting a large number of templates to support a large number of business cases, and some quite interesting usage resulting from that. Next one is the equivalent from from the IT perspective, and I think most vendors claim to already be doing this, which is seamless cloud native delivery, delivery at scale, and embedding into things, cloud native environments like AWS and Google Cloud Platform and Microsoft Azure. And I think that's that's fine. There's been a lot of good support on those delivery processes. But possibly there needs to be more developer education, again, to say not only is it technically possible, but actually it should be architecturally preferred in some cases to deliver cloud native decisioning technology alongside some of the other microservices development or mini services with shared data that coders are building. So it's not just a case of being technically cloud native, but also, if you like, a good cloud cousin for all the other services and frameworks that IT teams are using. And then finally, there's also the collaboration mechanism. So it's all fine for me to talk about, the business versus IT in terms of decisioning capabilities, but in fact, this isn't a either or. This is a continuous spectrum of development, ranging from business users who are, interested in understanding what are the decisions that they're making in the organization, through to the decision engineers that are building, a high performance, highly scalable decision service for use on their core customer platforms. And this isn't an either or. This is a spectrum. This is a collaboration, a mechanism by which both types of professional decision engineers and business technologists can collaborate to build decisions of various different types and complexity. So that's the sort of like, again, somewhat 30,000 feet or 10,000 meter view of what's coming next. Now, these are all fine predictions, but what's the sort of evidence we have to indicate any of these might happen? And of course, there's a lot of vendors here at this event who I'm sure will have many of these things on their roadmap, or will be looking at them to see whether they're of interest. I've run a few sort of surveys from the vendors to see what's going on in this space. And for example, when we looked at generic low-code vendors, and we call model-driven low-code, and it covers low-code is a paradigm. It's not a particular technology. We asked, for example, what were vendors looking to invest in terms of their investments for their roadmap in the coming year. And of course, there's a lot of interest in the developer experience. A lot were investing in the business process and workflow support, and at third, between 20 and 30% were investing in business logic, rules, and decision mechanisms, which I viewed as quite good news. So of course, a lot of the differentiation that vendors have between each other is around the developer experience. So of course they're going to do that. And naturally, on top of data, I'm going to be wanting to deliver process and workflow, but almost a third also doing investing in business logic and rules and decision mechanisms. I view that as quite a healthy sign. 37% claim to already support BPMN import and export. That in itself may or may not be important. I get very few questions from IT leaders, asking about standard support or anything like that. Mostly, if you imagine a CIO has a lifespan of 3 years in an organization on average, then the long-term effects of their decisions is going to be less important to them than the quick wins. So it's not, and standard support is more likely to be a long-term win rather than a short-term win. Although for short-term, of course, having a consistent language and interoperability of skills is actually important, but it's not something that, as I said, that I get questions about. 37% claim to support BPMN is pretty good. I suspect it's a little bit less. 17% claim to support DMN in some way or fashion is probably also optimistic. And remember, this is of numbers of vendors, not extrapolated to numbers of end users. And in terms of context for that, 40% of the low-code platforms we surveyed had less than 1,000 developers who were using each platform. That's not the developers of the platform, that's developers who were using the platform that was being provided by these vendors. So communities of 1,000 developers is pretty small. But 9% had communities of more than 100,000, which is pretty big. So that puts the standard support into context. If I have only sort of like a couple of hundred developers for my tool set, then it's more likely to be successful if I can use some standard notation or even expression language. This is where where things get quite interesting. We haven't seen sort of like I said, a huge amount of interest from end users, but there is always this concern about vendor size, etc., which is remediated by the use of standards, and we do see some of these more extensive and larger low-code platforms, and that includes vendors like Oracle with their Apex system, as well as ServiceNow, Microsoft, etc. Some of them are beginning to double down for some of these standards types of solutions. So, for example, Salesforce recently acquired an RPA vendor which embedded the Commander engine, which of course supports DMN. So it's very interesting to see what will happen with some of these large vendors on some of their partnerships and relationships regarding standard support. So I think we've got a reasonable amount of confidence that decisioning will continue to grow, but there are some distinct actions which should be taken by the industry, I think, to improve the rate of take-up, because it does seem quite slow from where I'm standing. So in terms of my concluding remarks, decision engineering should be much more popular than it is. We get very few sort of like levels of interest in this compared to the amount of decisions being embedded in technologies. And it seems strange that this is not yet taken off or become more popular in end user organizations. We will see what happens over the next 5 to 10 years. I think probably there will be continued interest from the analytics community, and that may drive continued evolution and growth. Most decision management tools don't yet target the huge audience of business technologists. Now, I think a lot of vendors would disagree with that and say, yes, we do. We support business technologists. But business technologists cover quite a broad range of skills, and I think there's certainly a case for more citizen developer experience to be considered for core decisioning. And we have a pyramid of applications we often talk about to clients, and the top super scaled applications are the ones that a lot of IT teams like to talk about. Are the ones like Spotify or Netflix, where I'm delivering at huge scale with huge engineering problems. But the vast majority of applications are actually supporting, departmental use cases. Quite often using tools like QuickBase and Airtable and Smartsheet for relatively simple sort of like use cases. And that's the sort of area where decision management needs to sort of target, I think, to widen the market and get broader interest. Effectively, follow the example of the RPA market. Declarative model-driven development is due for resurgence. As I said earlier, we see organizations deciding to code their way out rather than using the built-in orchestration choreography tools provided by embedding a BPMN tool. And I'm sure that's also true for some of the decisioning use cases as well. But these things are cyclic, and the high cost of delivering a model, a modern professional developer tool set, and the training to deliver it, and the coders to use it is quite extensive. And we have this huge potential audience, this huge business technologist pool who could potentially be doing more declarative model-driven development, higher abstraction, decisioning and process. So I think that's due for resurgence based on the fact that we have this huge audience awaiting these tools. We also are awaiting decision management to be proven in software as a service. So a lot of the SaaS vendors are providing some levels of configurability. Often they are themselves providing some decision capabilities, but we haven't seen sort of like a whole-scale recognition that the flexibility and configurability that a decision approach can give you can also improve the reusability and configurability of the capabilities built into your software as a service. As I said, there's this huge drive towards buy over build, and we do see the decision some of these SaaS vendors embedding some decision management technology now. So it'll be interesting to see whether this also acts as a boost when professional developers recognize that even software as a service can be, provide advantages by embedding decision management, and whether that will have a knock-on to the rest of the developer community. So that concludes my keynote. I hope this was interesting and open to questions. Thank you very much.